On tonight with Trump's ceasefire announcement, we wanted to zoom out and get some perspective. And my next guest is one of the very best when it comes to that. Earlier this evening, I spoke to Heather Cox Richardson, professor of American history at Boston College. She writes the popular newsletter Letters from an American and is the author of the New York Times best-selling book Democracy Awakening: Notes on the State of America. Watch this. Heather, I am so glad you are with us tonight. You wrote that while there is still a lot that is unclear, President Trump's decision to carry out these strikes on Iran does fit a clear pattern for him. Can you explain?
Well, what I wrote was that it fit the pattern of disregarding the Constitution, and I think it really does that. But I think that's also part of a larger pattern that has been part of Republican Party history for the last 40 years at least, and that is a reliance on the idea of dominating others through force, through violence. And you see it really especially in the attack on Iran, because in fact, the Republican Party has called for attacks on Iran since at least 2007. You might remember Arizona Senator John McCain, who was running at that point for the presidential nomination for 2008, talking about bombing Iran with, sort of a ditty from the Beach Boys, Barbara Ann. But the Obama administration actually negotiated between 2013 and 2015 an agreement with Iran that worked. You know, we all believe that it worked, that there was inspection of Iran's nuclear sites and so on, that made sure they didn't enrich uranium, which was the concern about their developing of nuclear technologies. But in fact, the Republicans continually insisted that that was not sufficient. And of course, Donald Trump tore that agreement up in 2018 when he got into office. And now finally, they have bombed Iran. To what end, it's not at all clear. But now that actual fact of bombing has been enough for President Donald Trump today to declare everything's over and now we can all have peace.
Isn't that extraordinary, though, because many people, especially many Republicans who have wanted us to make this move on Iran for years, are saying, great, mission accomplished, but we still don't know what lies ahead.
Right, and we still don't know what damage was done by those strikes. There's certainly evidence that's been reposted in a bunch of places today that, in fact, the Iranians had moved the enriched uranium out of the facilities, especially Fordo, where it had been before Trump started posting on social media that he was going to attack Iran. So we don't actually know what happened. There's a lot of performance here, the idea that simply by flexing America's military muscles, we have accomplished what the Republicans and Donald Trump wanted to. Whether or not that's actually the case, we're not going to know for quite a while.
Let's just think about the last 2 weeks, right? One weekend, we saw huge protests across the country against his administration while the president held a military parade. The very next weekend, he launched unprecedented military strikes. What was your initial reaction when you heard Trump made this move on Saturday?
Well, I'm laughing because don't you feel like every week in this administration has been at least a month long? So you look back at the No Kings protests, in which more than 5 million people turned out to protest this administration and this president, happening on the same day as what was actually not necessarily a badly conceived military parade, which was supposed to look at the different eras of the American military. But of course, that became known as Trump's birthday parade, and it was an utter fizzle. And then from that, immediately, we moved into the idea that Trump was going to flex his muscles, again, in what looks very much like a performative demonstration of might, of violence, of this sort of idea that just by flexing your muscles and exerting power over somebody, that you can get what you want. And the issue with that is that it is, first of all, performative, but second of all, as we all know from our own lives, simply insisting that you're going to get your way by hurting somebody or by dominating somebody very rarely works. And in this case, we had the example directly in front of us of an actual negotiation amongst a number of parties, a number of different countries, that worked. We had a number of years of proof that it worked, tore it up in favor of violence, and now simply Trump declaring that this is going to stop Iran's nuclear program may or may not be the case, but we have no proof at all yet that it has been the case. So we're looking at this moment where we're really seeing a test of this idea of sort of performance domination on the one hand versus the real hard work of negotiation and figuring out how to live with people and being able to see, well, we know that the negotiations worked. Is this sort of performative violence going to work? And we'll find out over the next several years.